Okay, let's start with a big one. What came first, money or debt? Now, it sounds simple, right? But the answer, well, it might just flip everything you thought you knew about economics completely on its head.
I mean, what if that neat and tidy story we all learned in school about how money was invented, what if it's not just a little wrong, but completely backwards?
All right, so first up, let's just quickly run through the story we all know. You know, the one you find in pretty much every economics textbook out there.
The whole idea is super simple, right? Let's say you're a fisherman, and I grow rice. If you want my rice and I want your fish, awesome, we can trade. But what if you don't want my fish? What if you need, I don't know, a new pair of shoes? That's what economists call the coincidence of wants problem. And the textbook story says, ta-da, money was invented to solve exactly that.
So the really crucial thing to get here is the timeline. The story goes like this. Step 1, we have barter, and it's kind of clumsy. Step 2, we invent money as this brilliant solution. And then way later, once we've got money in banks and the whole shebang, we finally get around to developing complex stuff like credit. See? Barter, then money, then credit. Simple, linear, makes sense? But what if it's just wrong?
Okay, so now for the big twist. Let's dig into the central challenge to this whole story, because this is where everything gets flipped on its head.
Enter the late, great anthropologist David Graeber. He basically dropped an intellectual bombshell with a super simple thesis. He argued that, for most of human history, we weren't bartering with random strangers. No way. We were living in communities, and everything ran on trust and mutual obligation. In other words, we used credit.
And this right here just lays it all out so clearly. The textbook story imagines a world of strangers who need a tool, money, to be able to trade. But Graeber's version, it's a world of neighbors who just kept it running tab, you know? If you needed some fish, I'd give you some, and we both just knew that you owed me one. That simple IOU, that was the original form of debt, and it wasn't a problem to be solved. It was the social glue holding everything together.
So you see, this kind of primitive debt, it wasn't about commerce. It wasn't about buying and selling stuff. It was a social currency. It was all about relationships. I mean, think about it. What's the milk debt you owe your parents for raising you? How do you settle a major dispute between two families? These weren't financial transactions. They were incredibly complex social arrangements built on the idea that some things, like a human life or a lifelong bond, just can't be quantified or paid back with a simple number.
But Graeber doesn't stop there. Oh no. He zooms way out and makes an even bigger, more mind-blowing claim that all of human history basically follows a pattern. It's a giant cycle swinging back and forth between economies based on credit and economies based on physical money.
Just look at this timeline. It's incredible. For thousands of years, you've got these huge agrarian empires, right? Mesopotamia, Egypt, they all ran on super complex credit systems, all tracked on clay tablets. Then, boom, around 800 BC, we hit what's called the Axial Age. It's a time of massive warfare, and suddenly, coinage appears. Now why? Well, think about it. How do you pay an army of mercenaries? You can't just tell them they owe you one. You need cold, hard cash. And this cycle just keeps repeating itself. Credit takes over in periods of social trust, like the Middle Ages. But physical money, gold, silver, bullion, it dominates during times of war, or when you're trading with total strangers over long distances. And get this, since 1971, when the US dollar was taken off the gold standard, where are we now? We're right back in a global age of credit.
So, case closed, right? The textbook story is totally dead and buried? Well, not so fast. Like any really good debate, there's a counterargument, and this one adds a really fascinating layer of nuance to the whole thing.
Yeah, it turns out the reports of barter's death may have been greatly exaggerated. The real problem might not be the idea of barter itself, but a very specific, kind of cartoonish version of that story.
And this is where the argument from economist Georgy Ganev comes in, and it's brilliant. He says, look, what people like Graeber rightly tore apart is that mythical story you see on the left. You know, this fantasy world where everyone is a perfectly rational economic man living in some kind of full-blown barter economy. Yeah, that almost certainly never existed. But the plausible story, the one on the right, that one's much simpler. It doesn't require a whole economy of barter. It just requires that some barter happened, you know, sometimes, between real people when they met as strangers. And that original, more modest version of the story, the one told by people like Aristotle and Adam Smith, well, that's never actually been disproven.
Okay, but this is all still a little abstract, isn't it? A debate between big theories. So let's get our hands dirty. Let's look at the hard evidence. What do we actually know about finance in the ancient world?
I mean,
If credit really did come first, where's the proof? You can't just say it. Show me the receipts. The 4,000-year-old receipts.
Well, here you go. Literally, this little clay tablet, it's a loan document from ancient Mesopotamia. It's over 4,000 years old. And this isn't some poem or a decree from a king. It's a spreadsheet. It's an accounting record, a legally binding IOU. And it's the smoking gun that proves complex credit systems existed millennia before the first coin was ever minted.
And we're not talking about simple IOU-1s scribbled on a napkin here. Thanks to scholars like Stephen Garfinkel, we know these things were incredibly sophisticated. They had standardized interest rates, get this, 20% for loans in silver, 33% for barley. They had specific due dates for repayment. They had the names of witnesses, and the borrower would press their personal seal into the clay, which made the whole thing legally binding. This is basically Wall Street, but in 2100 BC.
So, what's the big takeaway here? Why should we care about this ancient debate today in our world?
Well, Graeber's final point is a really powerful one, and it's this: the language of debt is never neutral. He argues that throughout history, it's been the perfect tool to take relationships that are fundamentally unequal, even violent, and make them seem moral and fair. It's a way to reframe power dynamics in the language of obligation. It takes a messy human relationship and turns it into a cold, hard number. And that leaves us with a really profound thought to chew on. If debt didn't start as a simple financial calculation to make trade easier, if it started as a complex social promise between human beings, then that forces us to ask a much bigger, much deeper question. Not just about history, but about right now, in our own lives and in our society today. What are the promises we've made to each other, and what do we truly owe?